All right, everybody, welcome back to Tech in Asia's Product Development Conference 2022. Would just like to take this chance to thank you, everyone, for joining us for this all the sessions today. All right, so this next keynote presentation is from Yash, the Associate Director of Sales at Searce Incorporated, and he will be talking about site reliability engineering for cloud native products. Now, there will also be a Q&A at the end of his presentation. So as soon as a question pops into your mind, just put it into the Q&A tab. All right, don't need to wait till the end. Just pop it in whenever you can. All right, Yash, are you ready?
I'm all ready.
Definitely ready. All right, the stage is yours, man.
Perfect. First of all, thanks everyone for your time and attending this session. I'm Yash. I lead consulting for Southeast Asia at Searce, a leading technology consulting company globally. We help companies in terms of their cloud strategy and modernize their infrastructure on cloud. Why we picked this topic, right? Because as a technology consulting company, what we have realized is that migrating to cloud or using cloud and actually getting the value out of the cloud are two different initiatives. There can Most of you guys, I would assume, use cloud in certain capacity, but to actually get value out of the cloud, you need to adapt to certain practices, which can be managed offerings available on these cloud platforms, creating the right processes, or having the right culture. uh, this is where I think I want to focus today's topic on is, like, how do you actually leverage the power of cloud to ship products faster, right? Because that's I think an ambition for all the product enthusiasts on the forum today, is like, how do we ship products faster, but at the same time without breaking things. Without breaking things is an important construct. That's what we are going to focus on today. uh, Before we get started, I would just want you all to make a quick mental note of where your current organization stands in form of your software delivery performance, and whether you are happy with the current pace at which you are shipping product, right? Because what we are going to talk today is hoping to help you reach from the status you are in, from the overall parameters that you see, to an elite stage. uh, and like, if you look at the overall parameters, this is where most of the product managers focus their time and attention, in terms of their collaboration with engineering management team. And why this is important, because when we look at the like study that was done by Dora, uh, the companies in the elite tier that you saw in the previous slide perform 2x better in all these metrics compared to the low performers. And like, if you look at these metrics, these are metrics that actually make or break business. This defines your go to market strategy, your customer satisfaction, and how do you differentiate compared to your different competitors. And in our opinion, I think this is something that differentiates a great technology company from a good technology company, right? And this is something that will ensure that you succeed in your business. So with that context, I think like, what I plan to cover today as part of this presentation is, I'll start with a quick overview on SRE, like predominantly talking about how it differs from DevOps, because like, DevOps is widely considered as that, okay, if we have DevOps pipeline, we are following SRE. So I'll just try to highlight some points there in terms of how SRE differs, and how SRE complements the DevOps pipelines that you would have right now. Of course, like, what would be the key pillars of SRE practices? This differs from tools, technologies, people, and several other parameters. So I'm going to talk about that. Then I'll talk about a loose framework. Like, we want to have a key takeaway for all of you on the call, that you can like, start executing on certain framework. So we'll talk about, at high level, what are the key parameters you should look at, and how do you start your journey to have a robust SRE practice. And for companies that are in series A, series B, like, or are as at the start of their digitization journey, as you grow from X to 10x, and we know this because we work with several unicorns. These are things, if you set now, like, would be much cost efficient and easy to deploy, compared to, let's say, once you reach a stage where like, things are growing too fast. And finally, I think we'll talk about how do you measure progress, and like, how can you get started with this whole thing. Now, let's start with how things have evolved over the years in software industry, right? So we had developers and we had operators, and this is like, how things have been working on the on-prem world. And even as things evolved on the cloud side, I think these are the structures that evolved. uh, but if you look at the traditional development models, they are siloed, and developers and operators are two separate teams. And the incentives for both these teams are different, right? So developers are working closely with the product teams to ensure that let's ship this product as fast as possible. There's a user feedback, we need to fix things and other things. At the same time, operators incentives lie on stability. They do not want any things to break. They have certain parameters they follow, and in a way, these two teams are seen as rival teams who are choking each other's neck at each point of time, right? um, and this is predominantly because of the conflict of incentives that we look at it. So how do we break this virtual wall that's been created in an organization? I think the first, what most companies started doing is to start adopting modern DevOps practices. You have your CI pipeline, CD pipeline, use infrastructure as a code. So there's some visibility, and then you put in certain parameters of logging, testing at each of these stages, so that can get a sense on your reliability. But I think that's a good start. But we need to have a certain framework around this to actually make this valuable. And that's where just defining both DevOps and SRE, right? At a very high level, both DevOps and these site reliability engineering practices that we talk about, they are solution to the same problems that we talked about in previous slide. But we can think of DevOps as a loose set of principles, right, that are designed to break down these silos and foster collaboration between the teams. So this is where you set up your pipelines. But like, as all of you would agree, there is no specific way to do DevOps, right? All companies have different tools, they have different methodologies. So there's no specific way in which DevOps, and that's the right way. Like, you cannot have a specific way in which your DevOps needs to be implemented. But what SRE does is, it is a specific set of practices and process that is condensed in a job function which implements DevOps principles, right? So we are not saying that you should have a separate SRE team, invest in 5-10 people to just do SRE. It's just that how do you embed these processes and principles and practices within your DevOps team to have a North Star where you start having measurable success in terms of the KPIs that you are setting, right? So one of the important part is that they're both designed to achieve the same goal, which is like to help organization deliver better software at a higher velocity. But this requires cultural and organizational support to succeed, and that's where these SRE practices comes in. So overall, if I conclude, SRE is a job function, it's a mindset, and it's a set of engineering practices, right, to run reliable systems and ship faster updates, which is the aim with which we look towards this whole presentation. Now let's look at key components of the SRE, right? And I've just put this into three key pillars. First is the process and the procedure. This pillar includes overall, what would be the definitions in terms of the team roles, very clear articulation in terms of roles and responsibilities, on-call processes, defining the SOPs in terms of, let's say, like when an incident happens, what should be our response. And these are there are some usual incidents that happen quite a bit. So how do we have a unified response towards that? An important part of this process and procedure, which I'll be covering, is the postmortem. A lot of companies, focus on fixing things, and then they move on to, doing things, their business as usual things. But there's very less focus in terms of postmortem. And this is something, as we manage infrastructure through these SRE practices for several large enterprises, we have seen as one of the most valuable outcome. And then the second pillar focuses on the technology and artifacts, and this is where I'm going to focus my framework on the key parameters, SLIs, SLOs, and how do you define that. And lastly, it's the people and culture, right? It's in the end, you need to have this as part of your overall organizational ethos, in terms of having a culture around SRE practices, and we'll touch base a bit on that too towards the end. Now let's go into the framework, right? Now, what is reliability? I think that's I think there's a widespread agreement that reliability is things not going down. But I don't think it is the right metric. And the thing is, it differs from business to business, right? for some companies, the reliability can be, having a secure environment. Even if the environment goes down, they're okay with it as long as there's no security compromise. So there's always a trade-off, and that's where you need to define your SLIs. And we go into some of these aspects, and try to have a loose framework in terms of how you should be thinking in terms defining your SRE strategy. Now we start with SLI, right? So I think everybody has heard of service level agreements, and service level agreements are in a way outcome of service level objectives. But I think the first principle in all these terminologies is service level indicators, right? Now each service level indicator defines a quantitative measurement of some aspect of what that service provides, right? This can be, for example, like a percentage of user requests that gives the right response within 500 millisecond, right? This is a SLI that like you want uh, like 99% of your, let's say, request to be returned in 500 millisecond for a particular service. Or it can be like a percentage of valid login attempts that succeed, right? And like for whatever reason they're failing, or number of minutes service remains available during a month, etc., etc., right? So every organization depends on where their users are, depending what kinds of users they have, and depending on the business goals that they have, will have SLI, will have to define SLI as part of the framework that we are determining, right? And this is the first step towards having the right approach. And a lot of companies would be doing a lot of things that we talk about from technology and implementation perspective, but where they are lacking is to actually define this service level indicators, right? How do we measure how we are performing rather than just having a DevOps pipeline that works? And what we see is that like some of the companies that we work with, they have internal metrics such as CPU utilization, server uptime, as when we ask them like what's your performance and SRE practices. But that isn't the best approach. It needs to be business friendly, it needs to be user inclined. So that's the direction in which you should start defining your SLIs. Then SLOs are nothing but target objectives for each of these defined SLIs, right? So like if, let's say, if I just continue on my previous example, it is the ratio of how many requests are failing to achieve the SLIs with the total request, right? So you will have a percentage number here which you would aim towards, that okay, I would want like X percentage of my request to succeed, and that's a successful outcome for me, right? So, and these SLOs are what will eventually turn into SLAs, which you would like ideally for a B2B company go to your end users or end customers, and and will go as part of your overall compliance framework. Now like I think what where a lot of companies also face challenges, they think that it should be 100%, your SLOs should be 100%. And in our experience, even if you look at like the companies that defined SRE like Google, right, they also don't aim for 100% SLO, because there needs to be some budget for error that all the teams in the organization can have, right? And this is again dependent on where your current organization state is. So overall, I think SLOs need to be defined within a target that both developers and operations people can agree on, right? It has to be a mutual agreement that these are the SLOs that we agree upon, and this can evolve, right? Like if you don't have the practices, you can start with something like that's easily achievable in the first couple of sprints, and then you try to evolve and measure and improve your SLOs in that direction. But it is very important to have a like a figure which you all aim towards. And another challenge with like having a like a very high aspiration in terms of SLO is it's costly, right? Like for the first, let's say 99%, it is something, or 98% is something somewhere you all maybe all the organizations that are on the forum are there. But then when you want to reach from 98 to 99, you need to make a lot of investments, and that's costly investments. And then same goes for 99 to like whatever additional nines you want to add, right? So it's costly. So you need to understand what kind of investments you can make to achieve the SLOs that you have defined. And lastly, it also drives a culture of like blame game. So if you're looking at 100%, it's basically a chaotic environment. Any point of time like things happen. If let's say there's a SLO that's like not 100%, everybody knows that there's, let's say, X minutes of downtime in terms of error budget that we have. And so there's general state of calmness and focus on solution rather than panic throughout the organization. And yeah, so this is where I come to budget for error, and it is actually a budget because it's basically something you are drawing against, right? So when you have your SLO and you deduct that from the 100 percentage, you will have your error budget. And now this budget would be number of failed requests, number of minutes of downtime, number of security incidents on a particular service, or whatever the SLIs that you have agreed upon as an organization, right? But it is very important to have this budget of error that all teams are aligned on, because what this does is this ensures the agility and innovation stays, right? We talked about how do we ship faster without breaking things. When you do that trade-off, the budget of error is super important. That drives the overall culture. You remain agile, you remain innovative, and you continue on the deployment frequency that you agree on, as long as you are within your budget for error. And if you are in a way surpassing your budget for error every month, that's where you need to start reducing your frequency of deployments, and need to start working on the back-end infrastructure that you are having. And what this also ensures is that you do not reach a stage of technology debt, right? So what happens is, at certain point of time with certain infrastructure, you will have a error rate which is within the budget. But when it starts going out of budget, that's when you realize that some things that we have set up need to evolve now, because they are no longer relevant with the scale at which you are growing, right? So this is again something that you need to be very clearly aligned on between all the teams to ensure the overall implementation of the SRE practices. Now, what do SREs do, right? Our aim is to meet the SLOs. So in other words, it is to keep the error cost as low as possible, so that we save as much budget as possible from that error cost. And now there are several areas to improve upon. In this example that you see, it's about what how do we keep our error cost low. Now if you see, there are four factors that predominantly affect the error cost. And this is where you as an organization will start investing into the right areas, depending on where your priorities lie. For example, you can invest in having the right proactive monitoring tools and processes to ensure that you reduce the time to detect a failure, right? Because that's directly proportional to your error cost. Or you can focus on building a 24/7 team and the right SOPs for each and every scenarios that can happen, to resolve issues as they happen, right? Because this will have impact on your time of mitigation, which is again directly proportional. Or you can do all invest in all these areas, which is impact and the failed request and all the other parameters that you see. And again, let me clarify, this is not an exhaustive list. You can have a formula or that actually fits in your organization's ambition. And you need to then you realize that these are the 5 areas where I can invest in. And depending on my business's priority and my technology team's direction, I'm going to invest in this area, because that will eventually reduce my error cost. So, I mean, this is an overall framework, and we will be happy to help further into some of these, to all the organizations on the call who are interested, to actually define a custom framework, for your organization. But this gives a directional sense in terms of where you should be thinking and how you should be measuring the success of your SRE practices, right? Now, how do we get started? One of the approach here is to adopt phased approach. Starting with establishing the foundation of SRE concepts. So you start with an MVP. Start with few SLIs and SLOs, and you start measuring them. And the next step is to start having teams and policies that team structure and policies that SRE teams are going to use, right? So first you have SLI, then you make teams aware of this SLIs and SLOs, and then you start having the right policies, SOPs to support the SLIs and SLOs that you have defined. And then you focus on the culture side of things in the next phase, which is in the team definition side of things. The last phase involves making the right decision, right? And this is where improving your DevOps pipeline, investing into monitoring tools. So from what we discussed in the framework, Once we have these parameters set and our goals north star align, then you start making the right investments in the direction and you start improving these things. This further also extrapolates to expanding the team and focusing on post-mortem exercises and upskilling. So there's an ongoing activity of upskilling depending on the evolution of your SRE practices. Now, the last part is the culture part, right? Like, in order to implement all the things that I shared today, I think behavioral changes are important, right? And that's what's going to sustain over a long time. I mean, you can have a project, but this is not a project; it's a program. It's like embedded in part of your overall, like core culture of your technology team, right? And without, I think, fundamental focus on people and behavioral change, I think that even the DevOps adoption is not something that is going to work, right? So a lot of companies have now built the DevOps culture. Now all you need, and the automation culture, like whatever is can be automated, but now you just need to start putting some numbers and objectives towards it, right? And for us to build that culture, I think that these are, like, say, five key areas where like we as an organization see that you should, as an engineering leader, you should focus on, right? First is, just like in life, accept that the failure is normal. Like, I think this ensures an overall level of trust and collaboration between different teams. I think key implementation here would be to conduct thorough and blameless postmortems. Like, it's not about like which teams led the outage, or like led the SLOs to go down, but it's just about like doing a thorough postmortem to ensure that you have the right practices and processes in place. It cannot be human dependent, it cannot be people dependent, it has to be part of overall processes and tools. Then we move towards reducing organization silos, right? And this is more to do around having each SLO break down to actual roles, right? Like, if we are defining an SLO, which are the contributing roles towards it and how they are collaborating, and this will drive your overall like individual team performance, measurement of the individual people that are working on this team. And this is what's going to drive a collaborative approach. Next is to make sure that the product and development team understand the impact of making major changes, right? It's always good to have implement gradual changes. You can have your CI/CD pipelines. You can have evolve around that. I think we do a lot of work. I think we are seeing a major move of moving monolith applications to microservices to actually achieve the third pillar that I'm talking about. Because if you have your microservices split across different pillars, that's where it becomes super easy for you to like make gradual changes. There's fourth is the technology side of things, where like you start working on your tooling and automation side of things. Drive a culture around like making sure that you're measuring like time spent on let's say regular tasks during the day, and then do a monthly exercise maybe to see which of these tasks can actually be automated, right? Fourth is around, I think, another aspect in the fourth pillar is also toil, and this is where, what I talked about around having the task where you're spending a lot of time is, important. Lastly, I think I've been speaking a lot about SLI, SLO, and, like several other parameters. But the bottom line is that you need to measure everything, developer productivity, like the cost that you are putting in this whole activity, and whether it's actually giving any value to you as a business, right? So like measure. And another important aspect of measuring everything is you can see where you are now and where you want to be, and what's the overall evolution of your SLIs and SLOs. And whether the investments that you're making in different areas is actually like improving things, because a consulting company can come and say that do this, do that, but is it actually improving the core matrix that is important to business? That's where like you need to start measuring everything. And I think this is where from process perspective, I think from culture, like what we talked about, the how do you start your SRE journey, but this is also about how do you start the SRE culture internally, right? So first is, again, it goes very similar to the other like adoption of SRE practices, is start defining the SLOs, then we start focusing on the pillars, other pillars we talked about around automation and toil, and then start regulating your own workload. So yeah, to close, I mean, like SRE is nothing but making teams happy and productive. Ship as often as possible. Don't break anything. Ever is something which is questionable. Ensure security and compliance, right? Because that is non-negotiable. And like do all three together. That's like something that we want to drive as part of this like session. Um, I think we are almost towards the end. We are Searce, technology consulting company focused on cloud analytics and AI. We have services on infrastructure and application modernization, data analytics, software engineering, applied AI, and few other services. 1,200 plus people globally, like working with some of the largest digital native businesses. So we understand your pain, we understand where you are and where you want to be, and we'll come in with very specific set of consulting and implementation services that can really help you guys grow. And lastly, I think on this specific part, right, on the SRE part, if you would want us to, work with you to actually implement the framework that we talked about and, like execute it for your team, these are some of the, like routes where we can take. What we will do is we will meet your organization at your current maturity stage, and we'll work with the teams to have a roadmap towards modern infrastructure with the right SRE practices. So beyond SRE, we'll also look at the overall infrastructure modernization, DevOps, and few of the other aspects that can, like really help you go in the right direction. And we can act in both consulting capacity, or we can also execute end to end for you, depending on the preference. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. That's us. This is my email. I think we have like amazing 600 700 engineers. Our engineering blog is again a gold mine for you guys to actually look at some of these principles I talked about. And yeah, I hope you start implementing some of these practices. Thanks a lot, everyone.
All right, thank you so much, Yash, for that great presentation. We do actually have a few questions from the audience. You ready for them?
Oh yeah, I'm good.
Awesome. Okay, so you did mention there about measuring everything. Our first question is from Bessie. She asks, "How could you please share some metrics to measure product maturity, as you mentioned on the product maturity assessment part of things?"
Yeah. So I mean, if I have to like speak about certain metrics, it again depends from organization. So I gave some examples, right? Depending on the industry you operate in, the end customers you have, there are different, like ways. But like some of these things around, specifically around how faster are you shipping features, how like if there's a ticket or a product feedback from a user or from a consistent set of users, how fast are you able to actually bring it back to your product development roadmap and ship it faster, right? Because nothing beats customer delight than the fact that they gave a feedback and this is something that's implemented in a time which is like not something they expect, right?
Mm.
So from I think there are two matrix. One is the engineering matrix. I think I focused a bit more on the engineering matrix. From product matrix perspective, I think it should be around like how faster are you shipping your products, and like how faster are you in position to inculcate the feedback that you're getting in the market to your product roadmap.
Okay. All right. So continuing on the theme of measuring, right? Muhammad Suhail would like to ask, what is the meaning? He wants an example, basically. What is the meaning example of using measurements to, to spur unbiased decision making? Do you have any examples you could share?
Yeah. So, like I think there's an organization that we worked with. They had an SLO, objective of like 99%, and they were sitting somewhere around 98%. And like I think one of the organizations, like came and told them that okay, if you implement infrastructure as a code, if you implement Spinnaker for your like CI/CD pipeline ingress gateway, that is going to solve your problem, right? Like, and they did all this implementation, but what this did is have further build further complexity into their environment, and they like ended up going in fact to 96%. So this is where I think it's important to measure, and they rolled back to their previous DevOps pipeline because it further dropped their score. So one of the like key takeaway for us is to like measuring things is also super important as part of POCs, right? So you need to take certain initiatives in a POC capacity and measure the POC outcomes to actually push before pushing things into production. Because just doing something which is on paper into your environment, which differs compared to many other environments that these other company would have worked with, will not result in the same outcome.
Okay. Right. So the latter part of your presentation there was about culture and about teams and people, right? We have a question here about do you have any best practices on how to scale up or down the SRE headcount on a team, and what are the conditions that trigger an action either way?
I think it goes back to, I mean, I don't think there's a silver bullet towards how many people do you have, depending on, let's say, how much are you spending on Google Cloud or AWS, or how many number of active users you have, right?
Mm,
It depends on the maturity of your practices, and that's where, if you're measuring this SLOs, right, and you are seeing that with a 4-member team you are consistently in position to meet your SLOs, then in fact, we would suggest that you share the responsibility of fourth person to do some other initiatives and see if this is impacting your overall practice, or you make them invest into improving that further, the SLOs further, right? So having this matrix is the key. Like having this matrix is defined and measured is one of the key outcome of that is you can make investment plans in the right direction. Like, do you need more people? What will be the skill sets of these people that you need to hire? And or you need to maybe make your people focus on other initiatives.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Yash, thank you so much again for your presentation. We learned a lot and for answering all the questions.
No worries. Thanks a lot, everyone. You've been good audience. Bye.
All right, thank you. Okay, to the people in the audience, the next up is another keynote presentation. This time we'll be hearing from Nachita Kanyandara, Chief of Product and Growth at Firebox, and she'll be talking about how we scaled, or rather they scaled, their product in a competitive market. I think that sounds very interesting, and I will see you guys there.